So here we are. And I thank you very much for coming back. This is Dr. Daniel Cohen, psychologist, educator, researcher, author, life member of the American Psychological Association, fellow of the Royal Society of Mental Health in England, director of the New York Testing and Guidance Center Emeritus, and my guest this afternoon. I'm Dr. Nancy Iankowitz, and we are here with the Fireside Chat today, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Today what I would like to do, and this is sponsored by Holistic and Integrative Healing, LLC. What I'd like to do is go over some of the questions that we have received from people in private email messages that you generously offered to answer, and we've answered some privately, but some of those people have given us permission to share the information because they thought that it was very valuable. And that is in keeping with our topic for today, which is boundaries, setting boundaries to keep a relationship healthy, setting internal boundaries so that we earn our own trust, which is a takeoff from one of our other broadcasts. So, setting boundaries and keeping relationships healthy, where does one begin? How does one know positive energy, negative energy? How does, just take it from there.
I think that the question of boundaries becomes highlighted in the adolescent and young adult years, even though it can be addressed in the very, very early years and in much later years. But trying to focus it on the young adults, especially in areas dealing with the potential for an ongoing relationship that might develop into a love relationship, or just one that might develop into a very long-standing, good friendship that can last throughout a lifetime. The need for the boundaries could be looked at both theoretically and practically. Let me see if I can frame it theoretically. Back when I was a very young man, back in the early, middle to late 50s, the psychology that was predominant at that time was transactional analysis by, if memory serves, Eric Berne, and his initial book, Games People Play. What he presented there was really a modernization, an update of the traditional Freudian concept. As you know, the Freudian concept was the id, the ego, and the superego, and Eric Berne said, look, let's call it with modern lingo. Let's call it the child, the adult, and the parent. And then he said, we all have all three within us at any given time. He said, so when two people are interacting, he said, there are actually 6 presentations that are there. First, for example, it's what I think I'm saying. The second is what I'm really saying. And the third is what I think you think I'm saying. And then it goes the other way too, like how are you looking at me? So there's 6 possible interactions, which means suddenly a one-on-one can be very complex. For those of you who the term transactional analysis might not be familiar, I urge you to Google it just to get a feel of what it is that early psychology was saying. It is as vibrant and vital today as it was so many years ago. What you heard Dr. Yankovic refer to in terms of being mindful, centered, introspective, self-reflective. Basically, that could be boiled down to trying to maintain the adult state. If you're in the adult state, the nature of a relationship that you have one-to-one with the other person, if they are in their adult state, is a meeting of the minds, a review of where you're at, what is acceptable or not acceptable, a feeling, a sensitivity to the other person's needs, wants, just as you expect them to have that sensitivity to your needs and wants.
So, just let me, for a second, so are you suggesting that when two people interact, according to Freud, when it would be the superego, which we would think would be the conscience, and then Byrne would be the adult, when you have...
Not
no?
quite. The superego would be the parent.
The parent?
The
The
parent.
ego would be...
The ego is the adult.
That's the adult, but we always have... But we're hearing that bandied about, and it's that people say, oh, get rid of your ego, you have too much ego. So
thank
it's
you.
like the I, or all about me, which sounds like the child.
Thank you.
But I know the it is the child, so that's very confusing.
Let me try to paraphrase what both Freud and updated Eric Byrne were saying. The id is basically I want, me.
And that's the child for Byrne.
That's the child. The ego, we'll hold for a second. The superego is the parent.
Or
meaning,
the conscience.
Meaning, no, you can't do this. Yes, you can do this.
Okay.
This is what you're going to do. Statement.
The judgment.
The judgment. The ego is the
Adult.
resolution.
You're saying it's the adult.
The adult. It's the resolution of the two presses, the child and the parent.
So from Freudian perspective, ego is really what we're aiming for, but it's getting a bad rap in the past 30 years.
Quite right.
Wow.
Exactly.
You know what? You know what this is making me think about? You know, in physics, when you have the law of attraction, which means opposites attract, but that has been moved away from, and people are saying like attracts like, as if it's physics, and it's not.
Right.
That's just a psychological whatever. They make it up, and it's writing on the back of that. Ego has gotten lost, because what you're telling me is ego is what we strive for, although we've gotten moved away from that. So if somebody is Bernian and they're dealing with Eric Byrne, they would embrace parent, child, adult, and don't be so full of ego. But it's not fair, because they're making a reference to Freud. I see. Now, so I know I'm interrupting,
No,
but
that's fine.
boundary setting would have to come in, I guess, when you are feeling uncomfortable, either with something within your own scenario or something that's kind of amiss. And if you are seeking clarification and can't get it in the way that you understand it, or you can't seek it appropriately from the person you're with, the feeling of disconnect makes you redefine the nature of that rhythm, that relationship, and then we start to set boundaries around our safety zone.
Right.
And that's the beginning of walling off, too. It doesn't... Some people can set a boundary so that they feel more comfortable, so that they can engage, but they engage only so far. And it's not as if I don't have boundaries, let's say talking to you. I have plenty of boundaries, but I feel very safe and comfortable talking to you. Well, professionally, and when we chat, otherwise, not during a broadcast necessarily. So how are you going to relate boundary and limit setting to this scenario?
For example, in our scenario right now, the boundary is that we are both comfortable not permitting anger or distraction to take away from what we are trying to share and to learn. However, an unspoken boundary is, I don't have permission to put my hands on you, nor do you have.
Right, respecting personal space.
Absolutely.
That's
is
a boundary.
A second boundary.
Except when we shake hands, then that is a
That's
breaking of that boundary.
That's
Okay,
acceptable.
personal space.
And there are those who are huggers, where for them, the boundary is so much closer, and they want to hug, and that's fine as long as it's acceptable to the other party. With reference to personal space,
That story of the back and,
exactly.
I like that, yeah, tell them that story.
I'm thinking of watching two of my professors at a social function. One professor happened to be Afro-American. The second professor happened to be white and came from a Presbyterian background religiously. Now, the boundary physically between a someone from that white Anglo-Saxon Protestant background is different distance-wise than those who came up from a ghetto or from a very close but crowded community. So that the comfort level is how you begin to approach the other person. My black professor was very comfortable, very close. My white professor was very comfortable at a distance. And as they were communicating, and they were friendly, it's not antagonistic, it's no kind of distraction in that sense, but they were having a serious conversation on particular either philosophical or particular point of interest to both of them, but they were looking to become comfortable. So my black professor would begin to move a little closer to the white professor, who, in order for him to feel comfortable, would begin to move back a little bit, and I watched them.
I'm going to stop you because you have an even more powerful story with with somebody who came from, it was either China or Japan. You had a different professor with eye contact and respect who was also having a situation with somebody whose background taught them that you make eye contact, and this one wanted more personal space and showed respect with no contact, with looking down, and you were actually invited, do you remember that one?
Oh,
to
yeah.
mediate,
But
because they were insulting each other by trying to show respect.
But what you're addressing is boundary as a function of culture.
Yes.
And what I am addressing is boundary as a function of distance between the two people.
But that's culturally defined.
But you're right, it is ultimately culturally defined. But let me just...
sorry.
That's okay. Let me just finish up with the one I started with, and I'll be very happy to share the second. And that is, I watched them, and they were unaware of this, actually march right across the total total room that we were in. They were they're totally engrossed in what they were saying and totally unaware that they were actually
It's
backing up
very
and so on.
interesting. They lacked self-reflection, and they weren't even picking up on the other guy, but they were both
But they were
mutually engaged.
totally engaged in what they were saying, which is an illustration of personal space boundary, which is what
Mhm.
you began our conversation with. The cultural space, if you will, that you reminded me of was the way in which these two people, both highly educated, both quite intelligent, both quite good in their own disciplines. When I spoke with them separately, I got a most peculiar reaction. One person said, I don't know why that person is just disrespecting me. I said, how so? He said, well, do you know that she never looked up at me? She never looked in my eyes. I said, uh-huh. And to you, respect would be face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact, and that shows you the respect. He says, absolutely. Now my conversation with the other professor, and I said, how did that meeting go? And she said, I tried to give him the greatest respect that I could. I said, how so? She said, well, I would never look him right in the face. She said, my culture, she said, you show respect and deference and you look down. You never stare boldly at someone. She said, so I really did respect and honor him. I said, how very interesting. I said, would you permit me to bring you two together for a conversation briefly? She said, of course. And I brought her over to the other professor, and I said, I'd like to share with you that from your initial perspective, two things were happening. The other guy was showing disrespect, and you were showing respect.
And you also told me that there was aggression. The woman felt that the guy who was looking straight in the eye was being aggressive.
Well, that was also part of that culture.
That was her feeling.
That's also part of the culture.
But he was trying to show respect.
And when I shared with the fellow who looked straight in the eye and so on, I said, to you, this shows respect. And the woman said, no, that shows aggression. That's disrespect. He says, no, I would never disrespect you. She said, I appreciate that. She said, just as I would never disrespect you. He said, well, then why did you never look at me? And she said, because I was giving you respect. And then, of course, I interjected. I said, culturally, and what they came across at that moment was the awareness of a cultural divide that they were not taking into account in trying to relate to the other person.
Well, if I may, in trying to be culturally aware and culturally sensitive, we may over-stereotype. There are people in the American culture, third generation in, who may have adopted people from other cultures who may look very different from the family that's the adopted family, and they may have a very different name. So somebody may look like they come from one culture and have a name that represents a religion or another culture. They go to school, and then in the name of cultural sensitivity, are approached by others, by other adults, it can be in college, professors, teachers, third grade teachers, what have you, and there are assumptions made. Your skin is this color, your eyes look like this, your hair looks like this, your name is this, you must be blah blah. And so I think in the American culture, we need to recognize that there are subcultures, not only within families, but subcultures within family units and individuals within the family. So when the children grow up and recognize that spiritually they feel very different from the family in which they were raised, even though they may look the same and they're biologically all homogeneous and connected, on some level, some vibrational level, they feel very different. So where they may have been raised in a family culture of, let's share and talk, but this is a very private, shy person, or let's not share and talk. Everybody just go to your room. If you have a problem, work it out, put it under the rug. And yet that child is an expressive child, but has no avenue of expression within the family unit. And again, you allude to this in that book we keep referring to that we're still not going to talk about. But I know you cover it in that book. I promise one day we'll get to it. But anyway,
Right.
so these are all cultural boundary, space, vibrational issues. And I think that the best we can do is make sure that we are comfortable within ourselves. And then be sensitive. Some of us are empaths, some are not. That's another discussion too. But be sensitive to the other person, because when you think about it, you can really pick up on a vibration. You could say it's a look, a body posture. Somebody's like this, or somebody's moving their foot really a lot, or bouncing their knee, or doing things like this. Or if somebody is calm and peaceful. You can generally pick up on a group of people in a room and know when you are welcome, when you are not, by the body posture. If somebody walked in and they saw us staring at each other, they might not approach. But if we go like this, and you tell, then if somebody comes in, they feel that they can approach. So picking up on yourself, self-reflection, as you mentioned in the last one of our other videos, one of our other discussions, and also helping the other person by reflecting back to them with your facial expression, but not anger. You know, then you get into a heated discussion, but maintaining, as you said, the Freudian, the id, which is the, not the id, the ego, which is the reconciliation between the id and the superego.
Correct.
And Burns' adult. So if you can bring your adult to a conversation where the other individual is either being a child or the id, or trying to be a parent telling you, always reflecting back the best of yourself so that you can create a safe environment so that the other person doesn't need to draw a boundary to wall you off.
And one technique to do that is to make sure that you have heard the other person, and you do that by questioning to make sure that you have understood what the other person said. And that begins to develop trust, respect, and begins to establish the boundary. If you think of two young folks who are just getting to know each other, and this is in a social sense, one may feel very much more comfortable actually making physical contact, whereas the other may feel very much shy about a physical contact unless they are requesting it or indicate that they are requesting it. And a lot of disconnect happens with young folks when they misread or misunderstand what the other person is signaling to them. They miss it. So all of that is, of course, boundary setting. And in terms of the language that we've been using in some of our fireside chats about being centered, the translation to this discussion would be centered is being in the adult mode, or if you will, having the ego be present.
With the way ego is intended by Freud. So with that, I'd like to get to a couple of the questions. My daughter's in 3rd grade and was told by her teacher that we shouldn't be touching her this woman, basically she's saying, we're not allowed to hug her, but when we had spoken with the woman, she specified that the daughter, the third grader, misunderstood and said that when the teacher was, of course, trying to teach, don't let anybody touch you inappropriately. You're talking about touching, and I know it's because we were talking. We have these questions here. Children very often misinterpret what they hear and misinterpret boundaries altogether, and when they grow up and remember things through the eyes of children, they can actually carry scenarios that never happened into the future. So she said, my daughter came home and told me that a teacher told the class that parents are not allowed to hug them, and then she later expressed that she spoke with the teacher. The teacher says, no, I told you that if you're touched inappropriately, you have a right to say no. So how does a parent who may have even relatives from Europe and they're big pinchers and touchers, how do we help this type of situation?
I wonder if I can presume upon your audience's patience for me to tell a silly story.
Oh, I know what it's going to be. I know the math. The math. I love this. I love this story. Let me close this window. You tell the story. I'm going to close this window.
The silly story is that the young child comes home and mom says, so sweetie, what did you learn today? So she said, oh, I was, I learned a lot in math. She says, really? She said, like, what'd you learn? And the child said, well, I learned that 1 and 1, the son of a bitch is 2. 2 and 2, the son of a bitch is 4. Mother says, what? She says, oh yeah. And she started to go 3 and 3. Mother says, just, where'd you learn that? She said, that's what the teacher told us. She says, really? The mother says, sweetie, thank you for telling me. Picks up the phone, and she wants a meeting with the teacher and a supervisor, which happens the very next day. And the mother comes in fit to be tied. I mean, really upset that her child would learn such a language. And the supervisor said, well, what can I help you with, ma'am? She said, I need to share with you what one of your teachers is teaching profanity at this tender age to children. And the supervisor was shocked. The teacher was shocked. They said, what are you referring to? And then she repeated the situation where her daughter had come home, she had inquired what she had learned, and she started to go through the sums, and she went through like 1 and 1, the son of a bitch is 2. 2 and 2, the son... And the supervisor was wide-eyed, and the mother was absolutely irate. And they turned to the teacher, and the teacher said, I understand, but what I said was 1 and 1, the sum of which is 2. 2 and 2, the sum of which is 4. Which bring a silly story, but
it's an important story because it highlights children mishearing, misreporting, misremembering, and lucky for us, that child came home and actually revealed something that was later identified as a miscommunication, which so often doesn't happen.
But to your earlier point about if the adult is present in the interaction, things can go well. But we have to keep in mind that we have all 3 parts of us at all times available. Both the child, the parent, and the adult. And if it's the adult that's in control, or if you wish, if you are centered and self-reflective, things go very well. But if it's the child part that is in control, the child is never older than 6.
So that's child fun, ha ha, or child throwing a temper tantrum?
It could be the delightful child where things
The
are just
fun-loving, playful
fun,
child.
love, absolutely. Or it could be the temper tantrum, angry child. But the point is, it's from a child's perspective, and even though the individual may themselves be young adults or older adults, senior citizens, if it's the child that's there at that time, that interaction is on no more than a 6-year-old level. And it's
And that's when the mishearing can happen.
precisely.
And maybe not double checking. Dr. Cohen, thank you very much. We're out of time. This was a pleasure. I hope you come back, and I know you will because we have a whole series that we are working on. So thank you, and I'm going to walk right over there, and I'm going to turn this off because we are the ones in charge. Our sound tech is not available. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.